You have further documents to lie?
Yes.
Order that the document do lie on the table.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the laying on the table of this House of the International Tax Cooperation Act, Amendment to Schedule, bracket, the Republic of Finland Order, 2017.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Madam President, I beg leave to lay on the table of this House the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Bahamas Registered Stock Directions 2017, and the Bahamas Registered Stock 2027 and 2037. Sorry, Mr. Finance.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
No further laying of documents, no.
Communications by ministers. Communications by senators. Questions. Answers to questions. Presentation of petitions. Appointment of select committees. Reports of committees. First reading of bills.
Madam President, I beg leave to lay the move for the first reading of the Proceeds of Crime Bill 2017.
I so second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a first time. As many are in favor, I need to read it. A bill for an act to consolidate and strengthen measures to recover the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime and to combat identified risk. As many are in favor of the bill being read a first time would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill would be read a first time.
A bill for an act to consolidate and strengthen measures to recover proceeds and instrumentalities of crime and combat identified risk.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of the Financial Transactions Reporting Bill, more broadly stated as a bill for an act to repeal and replace the Financial Transactions Reporting Act and for matters connected thereto. If I may obtain a seconder.
I so second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a first time. A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Financial Transactions Reporting Act and for matters connected thereto. As many are in favor of the bill being read a first time would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill will be read a first time.
Bill for an act to repeal and replace the Financial Transactions Reporting Act and for matters connected thereto.
Further first reading of bills?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of the Travelers Currency Declaration Amendment Act, more broadly stated as a bill for an act to amend the Travelers Currency Declaration Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
I so second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Travelers Currency Declaration Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill will be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Travelers Currency Declaration.
Further first reading of bills?
What about the substitution? We need to substitute these bills. David.
Further first reading of bills?
No, then no further first readings, Madam President.
Second reading and committal of bills?
Madam President, it is the intention of the government to seek to have second reading, committal, and passage of the two bills that I'm referring to in a moment, which bills we were just informed were passed by the Honourable House of Assembly and that has been communicated to us this morning. However, I may say these bills are highly technical bills, and there was a level of consultation, and even after the first when we read them the first time in this place, there came in some very, very late suggestions which were adopted, and accordingly, the bill that was passed in the House of Assembly varies slightly from the bills that are tabled here. And so we've sought and requested leave from the members opposite and the leader to move a motion to substitute these bills and to withdraw the bills tabled on the 4th of December. I will move that motion now. We trust then that once the substitution would have been effected, that we can receive the unanimous consent of this chamber to move on with the agenda set for today. If that be happily effected, we can move on. If not, then we would have to come back tomorrow in order to complete the government's agenda on this matter. As I've indicated publicly and to my friend opposite, it is a matter of urgency because there's a high-level delegation flying off to France and the Principality of San Marino to attend a meeting of the OECD and the Common Reporting Standards Mechanism there to sign a document called the Multilateral Competent Authority Agreement, which would allow the Bahamas' competent authority, who is the Minister of Finance, once these amendments are passed, to enter into competent authority agreements, either generally or with individual countries, as will be explained in my contribution. And so it's necessary that the law be brought into force before that time. So I will now move the motion that this House agree to substitute the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill, which I will now sign and date as of today, and ask that this be substituted for the bill previously tabled and read for the first time. If I may obtain a second.
Madam President, I do second.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam President. I had discussed this matter with the leader for the government business, and up to this morning, it seemed to me that there would be no issue about the unanimous consent of the Senate. We have no desire to delay the government's work, and the leader appealed to my patriotism this morning, so that is a strong pull. But as I indicated to him, there was a statement which was issued overnight by the Honorable Prime Minister, which has changed somewhat the landscape, which has attacked this side for delaying this process.
Not this process, not this process.
Yes, and the state of the financial services sector. This has caused some discomfort on our side. I received a late text just before this meeting, and what I asked the leader of the government is, before I can proceed, I would like to have 5 minutes to check with my principals to be sure that we are still on the same page with regard to this. And if you could accommodate that, then we will return with our answer.
I'm more than happy to do so. We did start a little late, and I thought that would have been enough, but I know how communications can be, and I know how it is when things are what they are. So with that comment in mind, this side would be prepared to ask that the Honorable Senate do adjourn for suspend for 10 minutes to allow proper consultations by members opposite, and I would appreciate it.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate do suspend for 10 minutes. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The Senate will now suspend for 10 minutes.
My opposite number, the leader for government business, that having consulted, we were able to proceed with the agenda today with the unanimous consent of the House. As I said, there was a deep offense taken by the statement this morning. I've been asked in the debate to amplify what our concerns are about that statement, and I think that should be sufficient to make the point. We do not want to oppose the government's movement forward on this issue. It is important for the country, and in that spirit, we do so.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. I believe it would be appropriate, Senator Bethel to bring that motion forward again.
Gratefully obliged to you, Madam President, and to the members opposite. Madam President, I beg leave to move that the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill, this bill be substituted for the bill formerly tabled, and that we proceed to second reading. If I may obtain a seconder.
I so second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act be substituted for the bill that was previously presented in the Senate on December 4th, 2017. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill that will be tabled today will substitute the bill previously presented in the Senate on December 4th.
Madam President, I beg leave to move that the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2017, which I would lay on the House at this moment, would be taken in substitution for the bill previously laid on the 4th of December, and we will proceed with that bill for second reading passage. If I may obtain a seconder. Thank you.
I rise to second.
Order that the bill do lie on the table. As many are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam President.
Can I have one?
Yeah. Madam President, I beg leave to move for the second reading and committal of the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill 2017.
Excuse me. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, today the Bahamas stands not so much at a crossroads, but at a turning point. The demands for tax transparency and the automatic exchanges of financial account informations with other jurisdictions, which started already by the fact that we had to immediately implement the American Financial Accounts Transaction Reporting Act, the FATCA. This process, which began with the implementation of FATCA, will now be rounded out to ensure tax transparency and the automatic exchange of financial account information with the G20 countries, the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development in Europe, and the European Union, and by necessary implication with the rest of the world. Over the past 20 years, the pressure for tax transparency and, quote, fair tax competition has intensified, with heightened threats of blacklisting and of aggressive countermeasures aimed at competing non-mainland jurisdictions particularly, but also some tax shelters and even Switzerland in its day on the mainland of Europe. There have been instances of naming and shaming, hacking, theft, or leakage of confidential databases from several jurisdictions. There was the most recent, the Paradise Papers, before then, Bahama Leaks, and before that, the Panama Papers. All of which, and even before then, there was the hacking and theft and publication of confidential client databases from countries such as Switzerland and Liechtenstein, all of which have combined to create a groundswell of now popular pressure to add to the efforts of the bureaucratic officials who really run this process in Europe and in the United States, and who have brought about these changes to the law. Jurisdictions and clients whose names were leaked in jurisdictions have been named and shamed. Confidential databases have been stolen, leaked. And the extension now of the mandate of the OECD, the FATF, the Caribbean Financial Task Force, the European Union in its Common Reporting Standards initiative, it's gone now beyond tax evasion. Tax evasion, money laundering, and terrorist financing were the predicates on which, since 1990, the Financial Action Task Force of the OECD commenced its process of intervention in the operations of particularly offshore financial services sector. That intervention led to the blacklisting of the Bahamas in 2000. And so it has continued. But the issue now is no longer just tax evasion. There's now a construct, a constructed phrase designed now to even go after tax avoidance, which traditionally and at common law has never been a crime, because the law recognized that every individual had the right to mitigate their exposure to taxes if they could do so lawfully, without making a false or fraudulent statement, without doing anything criminal, merely by looking at imbalances in the law and taking advantage of one imbalance over another. But over the past 20 years, they now have coined a new phrase that's gaining currency, that goes after this issue of the common law right to mitigate personal exposure to taxes. And they now speak about something called aggressive tax avoidance. The ultimate goal is to get rid of the right of the individual, I believe, anywhere, to mitigate their loss. And you pay whatever the tax is that the tax man tells you. The international community is set to limit the rights of their citizens, meaning their citizens and any companies owned by their citizens, to make lawful plans to mitigate the incidence of taxation whenever such lawful avoidance involves the use of foreign, non-domestic tax jurisdictions or tax laws. And this is where the difference is. They haven't quite got the courage yet to say to their own nationals and the companies owned by their nationals that you can't avoid or mitigate your taxes based on domestic imbalances in law. That may come. That may come. But they are saying you can't mitigate your taxes by utilizing imbalances between your domestic law and the law of any other jurisdiction. That becomes an aggressive tax avoidance. And therefore, that is what is sought now to be, if not criminalized, demonized, exposed, make anybody who does it uncomfortable, and ultimately prevented. And how is it going to be prevented? Well, there are initiatives going on aimed directly at forcefully encouraging the removal of imbalances in tax laws particularly affecting companies that are either international companies like IBCs or domestic companies incorporated in, say, one of their home jurisdictions in Europe, for example, which may domesticate itself in a foreign jurisdiction by registration, as under our Companies Act. A foreign company can register and become a resident company for the purposes of our law, and to make that kind of activity, whether through an IBC or through registration as a foreign company, make that kind of activity unlawful. Or, not being able quite to do that, to encourage, quote unquote, through what they call an inclusive framework, all jurisdictions with legal imbalances, particularly in terms of individual or corporate taxation, meaning lower tax rates or no tax rates. That's what I mean by imbalances. Lower tax rates or no tax rates. Well, to encourage them through coercive measures at the end, and the threat of coercive measures, to balance out and to change, yes. And we would see, though, from the list of jurisdictions that the European Union, and the ultimate coercion, of course, is blacklisting. And blacklisting does a number of things, because there's several initiatives going on. You have the blacklisting initiative, coupled with the de-risking and delisting initiatives, where these bureaucratic engines called the CRS mechanism or the FATF, they have pressure on the domestic banks, commercial banks, etc., in their own jurisdictions to aggressively reassess their relationships, particularly with offshore jurisdictions, on the basis that they are risky places to do business because of the threats of money laundering, terrorist financing, and tax evasion. And the evidence that they are risky is the blacklisting. So there's a declared state of being being found risky by the blacklisting, and once that is declared by the people who seek to get their banks to put the pressure on, their banks duly do a number of things. They can actually just simply remove their correspondent banking relationships with banks in the affected jurisdictions. So what happens is a bank, let's say, located in a jurisdiction like a Trinidad, where they have suffered heavily from this, or other jurisdictions in the Caribbean where it has been really afflicted, will suddenly find that they no longer have a relationship with a bank necessary for them to send funds or receive funds from London or New York or any other major financial center in the world. And the effect of this is devastating. And we also know that Trinidad has further had, this is even before the latest blacklisting, the imposition of a surcharge on every single financial transaction by way of a wire transfer or a banker's draft check. Any movement of funds across the border in the international banking system now receives a surcharge of an extra $7.50. So if someone in Trinidad wished to wire $100 to their child in college in the US, they got to pay $107.50 for that $100 to go, plus bank charges, which have also been increased, but that's sort of a discrete aspect. You just see that the cost of you sending the wire has been increased. So there are devastating consequences to this process. Now, let me make it clear that what I have explained is not a criticism It is an explanation. Because at the end of the day, when subjected to criticisms, these countries quite legitimately state that they feel that their tax dollars legitimately owed to them are being secreted away, and that in the process of this happening, it unfairly imposes a higher tax burden on all other citizens in their countries, and that what they are doing is legitimate self-defense. This was in fact the answer when in 2000 certain jurisdictions alleged that no regional blocking had any right, that only the United Nations could do the things that the FATF was seeking to do, and the answer was, well, we're protecting ourselves, and every state, either together or in concert with others, has a right to defend itself. And so they speak about countermeasures. So I am not criticizing their right to do so. I'm only pointing out what is being done, what the mandates are, what we need to do in order to survive and to compete. I do believe that the Bahamas has what it takes to survive. And in surviving, we have what it takes to compete, and to compete successfully, even on a level, non-tax sensitive playing field. And I'll explain that briefly. So I just want to sum up this state of play. If, and they didn't even mind calling the royal family's name, the Duchy of Lancaster, when it got around to naming and shaming. That's how serious they are in the latest Paradise Papers leak. If a domestic taxpayer or business or entity that could attract taxes mitigates its tax within the jurisdiction, presumably, of that country, that's okay. You can mitigate based on imbalances in your own law. But once you go outside, this is the way I see it going, that then becomes something that will be soon, they'll try and criminalize, called aggressive tax avoidance. Not tax avoidance. If you're in your own country and you juggle between laws, that's okay. That's tax avoidance based on what we have on our law book. When you go abroad to do it, that's tax avoidance that is aggressive and therefore worthy of censure and action. That's how I see it developing. But I want Bahamians to know that this is a scenario that does not only confront the Bahamas, it confronts the entire world. In the the European Union's blacklist released earlier this week, it was clear that they were blacklisting jurisdictions as diverse as the Marshall Islands, 4 Caribbean countries, and countries around the world. I could get the list. But anyway, it was quite a wide list. The United Arab Emirates. I mean, so they went to the Persian Gulf, they went to the South Pacific, they went to the Caribbean. They went all over and blacklisted a number of jurisdictions. So, you know, we Bahamians, you know, we tend to say, oh, they're only after us. They're not. They're after the whole scenario. Okay? Now, let me say that in the House of Assembly, I heard one of our articulate members going through the act and saying the amendments and saying this is a matter that has been determined to be in the that the Bahamas has a distinct competitive advantage in this area and it shouldn't be changed. Goes a little further. This area here, the Bahamas has a distinct competitive advantage and it shouldn't be changed. But unfortunately, the same way we could read our law and the business houses that would whisper that in your ear could read our law, the Europeans could read our law too. They read it as good or better. They consult on it as good or better. They know where, and in addition, one of the things that they complained of when they made an urgent mission here in April to basically inform the then government and the opposition that they'd reached the point where their views were that the Bahamas could not comply with its commitments made in 2014 to sign on 60 jurisdictions for bilateral exchanges of information, and that it was necessary for the Bahamas to give serious consideration to joining the multilateral convention forthwith, and by the end of June, or face blacklisting. Well, you know, when they came for this reason. Because one of the things they complained of is that a certain well-placed emissary and former minister was all around the globe, it seems, saying exactly the same thing that the young member of parliament was saying opposite. That the Bahamas, with its adoption at that time of only a bilateral convention, was enjoying a distinct competitive advantage over other competitors. And the way that was interpreted is you are trying to set up a position where you have a distinct competitive advantage against the European jurisdictions as well as your competitors. So that's the reality of where we were. That is where we were. And the fact of the matter is that there is not going to be any distinct competitive advantages based upon tax-sensitive issues going forward. That is the reality. And we all have to accept it. The world has determined that there will no longer be tax competition between jurisdictions because the tax competition is aimed at their tax base, in their view, rightly or wrongly. And therefore, this idea of having a distinct competitive advantage for something to do with taxes is not on the cards anymore. We had several meetings across a broad spectrum of the industries affected of late, over the last several months. Several consultations. I have given several talks as well to other smaller, more, I should say, focused groupings within, subsectors within the financial services sector as well. I know that my colleague ministers have similarly addressed smaller groups and larger groups. The one message we get from the industry, whether it's a big group or a small group, is this: that it is critically important for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, the land we love, to avoid further reputational damage. I was unbelievably relieved when in the latest Paradise Papers leak that came out, that the Bahamas was not mentioned in anything that's been disclosed so far. I was very relieved. The one thing big and small in the industry is concerned about: at all costs, avoid further reputational damage. We have thus far managed to do so. We are taking the steps necessary to do so. And we trust that all that we do will meet with success. The government and the industry as a whole recognize that tax-sensitive competition is fast becoming a thing of the past, that the only acceptable way to compete in the provision of global financial services is henceforth on the basis of competence, responsiveness, integrity, transparency, and speed. You have to be competent, you've got to have integrity, you've got to respond. I can tell you, many of these big companies you see advertising financial services in the US, you call, you're talking to a computer. High net worth individuals don't expect that. They don't expect to wait for hours for the phone to be picked up, or for minutes until someone press this number if you want that. Press this number if you want. They're not into that. They want to be able to pick up the phone and speak to their banker. So they are enormous, as America has particularly popularized financial services in order to get the mass markets. It has created space for those high net individuals, not on a tax sensitive basis, but on a responsiveness, connected, efficient, competent, transparent, and speedy processes and relationships. That is where you have the opening. And it's on that basis that the Bahamas, properly regulated, properly positioned, and properly motivated, can establish its continued niche and importance in world commerce. This is why, and one of the reasons why the government, seeing all of this happening, you know, this ain't just like pop up. We knew from 2 weeks before what the deal was when the Prime Minister and I and one or two party officials met with the Europeans. So we knew where it was going. Why, you wonder why we have the Commercial Enterprise Bill. And the idea is we are going to have to shift the platform. We're going to have to diversify. But we can diversify, we can attract and grow new service opportunities, but we can only do so on what I call the CRITS principles: competence, responsiveness, integrity, transparency, and speed. Transparency goes to the tax issue. The Bahamas financial services sector will have to adapt if it is to survive, and indeed is already adapting and is doing so quickly. I'm sure that if we can adapt to the new challenges, then we have the necessary skills base, tools, and I spoke about our backbone, our IT backbone with fiber optic cables, high-speed internet. We have the tools. We also have the environment. We have a beautiful place to do business, a lovely, warm, and welcoming people, lovely, ethereally beautiful islands and a country. We are ideally placed at the crossroads of the Americas, between North and South. No matter what they talk about, the London Stock Exchange and the Bourse in France, these stock exchanges, New York, NASDAQ, we are ideally placed. We have what it takes due to timelines, time zones, to attract here financial services business, even from the new billion-dollar magnates in Asia who would wish to have their monies invested in stock exchanges and markets in real time. The Bahamas has it. We have it. Let's just make use of it. Skills base, tools, and environment. We have the elements that can enable our financial services sector to begin to heal and to grow, particularly with new and diversified service products. The days of tax-sensitive tax anonymity are fast ending, and we must learn to compete against the world on a level playing field. But I am sure that we in the Bahamas have what it takes to rise and meet that challenge. So, Madam President, I now turn to give some specific consideration and information on the details of this process. We've tabled today the automatic exchange of financial account information regulations of 2017, the automatic exchange of financial account information amendment bill 2017. I've moved the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill of 2017. And I trust that we will have the debate under that movement, and then we will then just move to do the second reading of the other bill without any further debate. It's important to note the background of what has transpired prior to us arriving at this point. of amending the substantive legislation that were passed in 2016. That would be the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act, 2016, the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Regulations of 2017, and the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill of 2017. In 2002, the Bahamas committed to the implementation of the international standards on transparency and information exchange for tax purposes. So we committed since 2002 to engage in this process. In 2009, that would have been at FATF, but in 2009, the G20 countries, that's the 20 most powerful countries in the world, created a global forum. And that is the basis of this common reporting standard that we are accessing now, to strengthen the implementation of transparency and the exchange of information for tax purposes in 2009. The Common Reporting Standard was established by the OECD in July of 2014. In 2014, the Bahamas committed to the implementation of the new global standards for the automatic exchange of information, otherwise known as the Common Reporting Standard, CRS. The CRS contains the reporting and due diligence standards which underpin the automatic exchange of financial account information in tax matters. The CRS is an international standard, where a jurisdiction that intends to implement the standard does so in its respective domestic laws in order to implement the standard. By implementing its laws, reportable financial institutions in the jurisdiction are obliged to report financial account information to its competent authority. The same and must be consistent with the standards set out in the Common Reporting Standard set by the OECD in its inclusive forum. I mean, the inclusive forum is all countries, and we are a member of it, who sit around the table and agree. And you know how it is. The bureaucrats will bring out the document and we'll natter around about the edges and basically agree the substance, if not the form. And then everybody has to implement them. That's the reality of how it works. Now, okay. Yeah, one of the amendments in this bill will change the competent authority. The competent authority under the law that was passed in 2016 is the financial secretary. And that was not deemed appropriate for state-to-state communications. And therefore, the suggestion has been made, and we accept, that it's appropriate that the Minister of Finance should be the competent authority. Because under the framework that we are now entering, and I'll explain that in a minute, which is a multilateral framework within the multilateral convention, there has to be state-to-state agreement on certain things and state-to-state requests. And so, therefore, it was appropriate for the minister to be there. Now, the Bahamas, by upholding its commitments for providing the necessary legislative framework, the 2016 laws, avoided any threat of blacklisting in 2016. With regard to tax transparency, though, the European Union has set out 3 criteria which must be met for a jurisdiction to be considered compliant under the CRS. A jurisdiction must have committed to the implementation of the CRS and have the necessary legislative framework in place. We had it then. The jurisdiction must have concluded arrangements with all EU member states to automatically exchange information and have a largely compliant rating from the Global Forum on the exchange of information. Unfortunately, we only managed to get 2 such agreements worked out, and the mandate was 60. So that by April of 2017, we had 2 agreements when we needed another 58. And there wasn't a possibility then, with all the naming and shaming, of anybody else signing on with the kind of speed we needed to be compliant with what we'd undertaken to do in 2014. A jurisdiction must also have ratified or be in the process of ratifying the OECD's Multilateral Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters or have in place by December 31 automatic exchange arrangements to cover all European Union member states. In December 2016, this is some 2 years after our commitment, we issued letters of invitation. We've only received responses since then from 16 countries, but no agreements. The CRS implementation and the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act 2016, this act provides a mechanism that empowers the competent authority, now changed to the Minister of Finance, the ability to enter into arrangements with the jurisdictions for the automatic exchange of financial accounts information and to ensure the proper administration and enforcement of the Bahamas commitment under the CRS. Let me explain what our commitment was in 2014 and as it was embodied in the Act of 2016, how our commitment has had to change in 2017 and why the amendments are needed. In 2014, the Bahamas government agreed to enter the multilateral convention on a bilateral basis. And as I said, to enter into specific automatic exchange of information agreements with up to 60 countries. In 2016, the laws we are amending today, in 2010, the International Tax Cooperation Act was passed, largely to deal with FATCA, which was the issue coming on stream at that time. But it is flexible enough to deal with these issues, and so it now applies to all international tax issue cooperation. In 2017, because the country could not meet the standard it had agreed to in 2014, we were in a position where we were either out and blacklisted forthwith, or we would agree to enter the multilateral convention on a multilateral basis, not a bilateral basis. We did so. Notwithstanding that, the multilateral convention is now entered into by the Bahamas on a multilateral basis. There's still the requirement, even on a multilateral basis, to have specific negotiated agreements with individual countries. We have 33 TIEAs executed with most of the European Union, etc. And the quickest way to achieve this is by some of the amendments in the regulations, which will allow the Bahamas to add automatic exchange of financial account information components into the existing TIEAs. So this will greatly speed up the timelines for the Bahamas to achieve full compliance with having, as I've stated, with arriving at where we strategically think the Bahamas needs to be. We must have either full common reporting standards agreements or duly amended tax information exchange agreements with those countries with whom we already have tiers, as they're called, with every G20 member, every European Union state, and I think those are the two critical areas, those two, and anything consequential on that that we deem necessary in our interests. Okay, but certainly all of the European Union, and the OECD members, and the G20, those are the three areas. G20 members, OECD members, if they are wider in number, and European Union, if there's any difference between the European Union and the OECD, whatever they are, all of those areas will be covered. We are already covered with the United States of America with FATCA. Canada will come in as a G20 country. So we think, and OECD member. So we think that with that, we will cover the main countries necessary. Undoubtedly, it may well be necessary for us to look also in our region and perhaps elsewhere in our hemisphere. But there are some carve-outs if jurisdictions are likely to leak or profiteer officials can't be trusted to keep information that is being requested confidential. There are certain areas where you can object to providing information or entering into agreement with jurisdictions where there is a real possibility that their residents who might have some financial information in the Bahamas, and that information is automatically sent to those jurisdictions, their residents could be exposed to death, kidnappings, other forms of financial extortion or harm. So there are some areas to refuse, but they're very, very, very limited and will not apply to any country in the OECD, the G20, or the European Union. So let's look at the Automatic Exchange of Financial Accounts Information Act as it was. As I said, it provides a mechanism that empowers the competent authority to enter into agreements with jurisdiction for the automatic exchange of financial account information to ensure the proper administration and enforcement of our commitment under the CRS. The Global Forum Working Group on the Automatic Exchange of Information and Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes recognizes the Bahamas has made several commitments to the OECD, and we're being held to them. We did undertake, since 2014, to fully implement the CRS and its exchange provisions by 2018. We did agree to enter into bilaterals with jurisdictions. In December of 2016, the Bahamas commenced its application to get bilaterals, but as I said, by June, they had only gotten 2. And so we advised of our decision to join the MCAA. As a result of the decision to join the Multilateral Convention on the Exchange of Financial Information, the acts and regulations were sent to the OECD for review and commentary, and based on their recommendations, amendments have been made. And as some recommendations, particularly one on to do with the issue of confidentiality. In fact, as late as yesterday afternoon, a query came in as to whether Clause 11E in the amendment to, I think it's the exchange regulations, whether that was saying that we had the right to refuse to give to some country on the basis it wouldn't be confidential, or whether it was saying that anyone who complied with the request in the Bahamas would be safe from any allegation of violating any other confidentiality law. And so, you know, I had the officials review it. Of course, I knew what the answer was, but, you know, it's never good for an Attorney General to give his own opinion. And I believe that a letter should have gone up. A view was expressed, but it was indicated we'd have a formal statement on it. And a letter should go up today to explain that by the chief draftsperson, the director of the Law Reform Commission, that this section was specifically crafted to ensure that no financial institution in the Bahamas would be liable under any other Bahamian law protecting confidentiality for compliance with the initiative. And that will also apply to anyone who may want to raise that sort of point under FATCA as well. Dealing with the automatic, the amendment bill that we have today, the draft bill seeks to amend the Act to clarify and expand the existing legislative framework to enable the better implementation of the CRS, to facilitate the Bahamas becoming a convention party, and to reflect the Bahamas' adoption of the multilateral approach. Now, bear in mind that we've still not acted as a member of the convention. We had to signify by the end of June our wish to join the multilateral convention, and we are awaiting a determination on that issue. in anticipation of that, a fundamental working relationship essential to membership in the convention is to sign something called the Multilateral Competent Authority Agreement. That is what is going to be signed in San Marino. If, however, the Union determines to accept our request to join the Multilateral Convention on a multilateral basis, at that meeting, they're also authorized to sign that document to allow that to happen. Now, Clause 1 of the bill provides for a short title, empowers the minister to appoint a date for its commencement when it's enacted. Clause 2 amends Section 2 of the Principal Act to correct and clarify key words and phrases in the Act, and to include in the Act certain additional words and phrases. Among them is agreement. That word is amended to clarify the types of government agreements that provide a legal basis for the implementation of CRS and AEOI under the Act. The word Common Reporting Standard has been expanded to include the commentaries and to make them binding for the interpretation of the standard. Because what started out as only a Common Reporting Standard has been supplemented since 2014 with a whole list of commentaries where they essentially break down the standard set and give examples. Like if you look in our penal code, we did this years ago, we did this decades ago, we did this in the 1920s. You'd have little sections where talking about stealing by reason of employment, we'll say, well, if John is working for Henry and takes 2 oranges and decides to put one back, he's still stealing by reason of employment because his job was to put all oranges in the pot. That's the sort of thing. And their explanatory notes, well, they created a whole series of guidelines to explain, and it's critical because the mandates themselves are general and not specific, but when you read the guidance notes, then you see the full picture that doesn't really jump out from the different mandates. Then you realize that, oh, okay, this is looking not just at not competing, but it's looking at beneficial owner information. It's looking for looking at your tax structure to ensure that your taxes aren't competitive with theirs, et cetera, et cetera. So a number of these words have been amended, and you'll see here that we replace the financial secretary with the minister, or the minister's duly authorized representative in writing. But he has to have, it's the authority of the minister that counts, not the financial secretary. And we add in the words the Multilateral Competent Authority Agreement, which were new creations. Now, pending our accession to the convention, the Common Reporting Standards implementation will continue with the amendment of the existing bilateral TIEAs. Once we have acceded, if there's any country that we need to sign with, being, as I said, those we're strategically targeting, we will then enter a CRS TIA with them. A CRS, especially drafted by them, Common Reporting Standard, Tax Information Exchange Agreement with those countries that we need to sign with. On us becoming a party to the convention, having already become a signatory to the Competent Authority Agreement, as we will do next week, implementation of the automatic exchange of information between competent authorities, that's the Ministry of Finance, and those countries with which we enter either amended TIEAs or CRS TIEAs, will then take place bilaterally through mutual consent and with the participating partners, meaning all of those institutions that have to report that information to the competent authority can get it to the other competent authority who can have it dealt with appropriately. Okay? There are 61 countries right now that have signed this competent authority agreement, the multilateral one in Europe, and all financial center jurisdictions of note have already signed it. We are lagging, and we're trying to catch up. So the predominant legal instrument facilitating the automatic exchange of information in the future will be both the multilateral convention and the competent authority agreement. So basically, I could go through clause by clause with what each is doing, some just to correct clerical errors, some to redefine, new parts are being added into, on the one hand, in the tax cooperation bill, create the whole, to add sections that will allow for the automatic exchange of information in the International Tax Cooperation Act, and create enforcement section where for the first time in a cooperation bill, there's the ability, and I'm just touching on the salient and important points rather than telling you where they took out an A and put in a semicolon. In the International Tax Cooperation Act, for the first time, there will be the ability to impose an administrative sanction of up to $300,000 upon any entity, domestic entity, that fails to cooperate, that suppresses or hides accounts, and if it's discovered, then an administrative fine can immediately be slapped on them for $300,000 in addition to other penalties for breaching the law. So, in short, these are the steps that are taken. Essentially, all of the amendments before my colleagues here really are of a technical nature. They're sometimes very small, changing one word, changing one sentence, renumbering, adding an individual paragraph, and they're very technical, and I won't belabor my colleagues with them, but what I will do is I will make available a copy of the full notes here, which would assist those who would wish to go textually through the bill to see the several bills to see what they achieve. Suffice it to say, Madam President, that we are in a new world, and you'll either sink or swim in it. Well, we are an island nation. We are an archipelago. We will swim. We ain't sinking. We will do the necessary. We will do it well. We will live up to our commitments, and when we do so, we will succeed. We will lead. Bahamas, grab the challenge, do what has to be done, hold our hands in this process as we will hold yours. Members of the industry, let us look to a brighter and better future. Let us do what we have to do to remove the clouds of doubt, to remove the insinuation, to remove the name shaming, to improve our presence, and to regain that leadership in the provision of financial services that the Bahamas has traditionally enjoyed. And may God bless all of our endeavors in that regard. Madam President, I thank you very much. I now formally move for the second reading and committal of the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill, if I may obtain a second.
Madam President, I rise to second.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jamal Must. You just seconded. As many? Opposition? Speaker?
Mike, we just, the designated speaker is just off.
Yes, I understand. We'll just wait a moment. I see your colleague and your... No. The former Minister of Grand Bahama was meeting with the current Minister of Grand Bahama.
Is there
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Mike Darville.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Madam President, and please forgive me. We were having a pretty good discussion, me and Senator Thompson. Yes, concerning some good news for the island of Grand Bahama, which I share and so happy to hear. But first of all, Madam President, I would like to thank the leader opposite for an excellent explanation of the bills. You went into a lot of the technical issues surrounding the bills. I happen to understand how technical the bills are because I sat in the cabinet when we met with representatives of the OECD concerning this whole business of bilateral versus multilateral agreements. But Madam President, today I rise to make a brief contribution to the compendium of bills, mainly the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill and the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Bill 217, which seeks to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act to strengthen compliance and enforcement with respect to the common reporting standards and to reflect the Bahamas' adoption of the multilateral approach to the automatic exchange financial account information necessary to facilitate the Bahamas' accession to and compliance with the Multilateral Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance on Tax Matters. Madam President, even though some people in the industry, after reviewing the bills still believe that both amendments to the bills are a bit vague and subjective, I happen to support both pieces of legislation and the accompanying regulations as the government and the members of the Financial Services Board work with representatives of the OECD and the European Union to move swiftly to meet the requirements outlined in the Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance on Tax Matters. Madam President, both bills were supposed to be non-contentious this morning, but when I woke up and read in the newspaper the press release by the Prime Minister indicating that the Progressive Party played some role in the delays of the bills, and that was very disappointing to us, and that was the reason why the leader on our side had to consult with members in the lower chamber to determine whether we should go ahead with the debate today. But Madam Speaker, I had no intentions of getting into any details to create contention, but I just want to make reference to two pieces of information. The Tribune, dated December the 8th, 2016, by an article by Neil Hartland, as well as an article on September the 14th, 2006, by Neil as well, when he interviewed prominent QC with McKinney, Bancroft, and Hughes, who spoke specifically about how things changed midstream for the Bahamas, which resulted in us moving now from the bilateral agreement to the multilateral agreement. This was very unfortunate for us because then Minister of Financial Services sector, as well as the industry, was in close relationship as it relates to where do we go and how do we move with our reporting. And at that particular time, we had an option to choose between the bilateral or multilateral that was outlined by the OECD. Industry advised the government to create policies to move towards the bilateral, which we did. And subsequently, one thing led to another, resulting to where we are today. So it had nothing to do with the fact that the Progressive Party and the then Minister of Financial Services sector dragged their feet. It had to do with what happened in the international arena that was completely out of our control. It caught the board by surprise, as well as many in the financial services sector. But life goes on. And I think the members, the Attorney General, in outlining the bill, clearly defined that a lot of things that's happening in the industry are out of the control of the Bahamas, and we must adapt to comply with the regulatory framework that is outlined, particularly by the G20 countries. Madam President, both bills were supposed to be non-contentious, and like I said before, I came this morning a bit geared up to defend our position, but I was very pleased to see how the AG basically took the debate at a different level, and I choose to do the same thing. Madam President, we on this side understand very well the time-sensitive nature of these bills, because months before the general election, the former ministers, Strawn as well as Pinder, worked closely with the Financial Services Board and stakeholders in the industry to address many concerns affecting the financial services industry and to meet the new requirements outlined by the OECD and the EU. All of us who have had the opportunity to sit in cabinet understand that governance is continuous. And after we lost the general election, the current government and the current Minister of Financial Services and his technical team were left to complete these negotiations in the sector that we started. We are pleased that the recommendations that we left behind, which subsequently prevented us from being blacklisted, this administration continued on in the same pathway, being advised from the industry. A lot of people think that this is something that the government comes up with. The government seeks advice from the industry to guide us on how to create laws so that the industry could flourish. We did that. And I'm pleased today that the current administration is doing the same thing. Madam President, with the passing of these amendments, the Bahamas will be standing with major players in the international community and reaffirming our commitment to addressing the issues of money laundering while fulfilling our obligation to protect our financial services sector, which is the second pillar of our economy. But, Madam President, despite the challenges in the financial services sector, the Bahamas is still a highly respected and sophisticated international financial center established on common law, policy stability, tax neutrality, and throughout our precepts of regulatory framework and competent environment. We have modern infrastructure, we have excellent communications, and our proximity to the United States has definitely gave us the advantage. And I think we should all around the table work hard to ensure that the industry survive and we capitalize on what our advantage is as it relates to proximity. But in 2000, after being blacklisted for being non-cooperative in the global fight against money laundering and financial action task force, the Free National Movement enacted 9 pieces of legislation, which proved to create a new framework for more comprehensive and enhanced supervision of financial institutions, corporate services, international business companies in the Bahamas, while establishing a more coordinated system for deterrent against money laundering and other criminal abuses that existed in the financial services sector. Madam President, having regard for the significance of the financial services industry as the second pillar of our local economy, the Progressive Liberal Party understood very well, and we established the Financial Services Ministry in 2002 after the general election. The Minister of Financial Services under the Progressive Liberal Party was responsible for providing leadership in the industry and direction in restoring the Bahamas to its once position, enjoying as a very strong international financial center and banking center. Madam President, the financial services industry of the Bahamas is still facing considerable challenges, evident by the drop in ranking by the Global Financial Center Index in 2010. During the last F&M administration, and this is the reason why when we came back in 2012, we reestablished the Financial Services Ministry and the investment to ensure that the Commonwealth of the Bahamas remain as an important regional and offshore financial center. So we saw the need to establish a bureaucracy that will focus specifically to protect the second pillar of our economy. And this is one of the reasons why in 2012 we brought the Ministry of Financial Services sector back. And I'm so pleased that the Free National Movement has decided to follow suit. This is good news. And this is the beauty of the continuance of governance, because when you're doing something right, it's important that the government that come forward continue in that pathway rather than disassemble something that is proving to be beneficial to an industry. But, Madam President, financial crimes knows no boundaries. And given the realities, this administration must continue to ensure that every effort is made to show the world that we are committed to meet, to comply with global standards, in addition to properly identifying and addressing the risks involved in money laundering, terrorism financing, to establish and maintain a stronger and more robust regulatory regime and framework for our country. The Bahamas, indeed, is open to business. And I read in the paper where the Prime Minister indicated that the industry is dying. I beg to disagree. The industry has challenges, and there's certain aspect of the industry that is struggling. But the financial services sector and the financial services industry in the Bahamas is definitely moving and progressing in order for us to capture a section of the market that we believe we are positioned to obtain. Madam President, furthermore, we must continue to anticipate and implement effective countermeasures to new and resurging trends in money laundering, terrorism financing, and related activities, as well as to assist the international community in the fight against the illicit activities through timely sharing of information. This is one thing that the Bahamas has clearly indicated in our policies. We have no intentions to be dodging and ducking. We want to be transparent, we want to be accountable, and we want to demonstrate to the world that we have the intellectual capability to come up with new packages that could be competitive rather than going the shady route. And so when we met with members of the OECD, we made it very clear that the Bahamas has no intention of hiding anything. We want to be a clean jurisdiction, and we want to benefit from this industry by doing it the right way. There's no question, then, that we all know that what we give to the world, we cannot take back. Reputation is everything. And once that is lost, credibility is gone forever. A well-regulated industry will help considerably to sustain and attract businesses to the Bahamas, and these amendments will help the government and help the industry accomplish this important milestone. Attracting new businesses to our shore in the current economic climate is very competitive and challenging. This is why we have to utilize the bright minds in the financial services sector to design new packages that we can attract businesses from around the world. I believe these amendments would facilitate the industry and hopefully attract new businesses in our jurisdiction because investors need to know that they are operating in a safe, well-regulated environment, and their finances can be protected, and their money, which is a priority to them, will be secured. So I joined the AG in his explanation, and I'm very pleased, sir, that something as important as this, we deal with it at a higher level simply because it is very important for our industry to survive and to make sure that we actually create more jobs in the industry. We were very disappointed in the report this morning in the newspaper because it's not only untrue, it really, if you trace the whole negotiation process, the industry is aware, as well as members of the OECD realize that under our administration, we made all the proactive moves to ensure that we were not blacklisted, and we complied what was necessary to comply with. Madam President, these amendments would certainly help the financial services sector, accession to and compliant with the Multinational Convention on Mutual Administrative Tax Assistance, ensuring that we maintain our competitive edge. We must never forget the negative implications of the 2016 article in The Economist, which stated that the financial services industry, by identifying the Bahamas and 15 other nations that did not sign the multilateral convention after agreeing to implement the common reporting standards on a bilateral basis by way of negotiation of tax agreement one country at a time, with nations seeking to automatically exchange tax information with the Bahamas. This was very problematic for the industry because both the government and the Financial Services Board agreed that we would proceed with the bilateral approach, which was better suited for our jurisdiction. The article unfairly, in my view, prejudged the Bahamas and suggested that we were using our bilateral approach to navigate around the effective implementation of Common Reporting Standard by 2018. The Attorney General spoke about that a bit, and we are on the same page as it relates to the fact that we did make the right steps. Madam President, these assertions proved to be untrue because prior to the report in The Economist, the government and the Financial Services Board clearly indicated to the international community that we were committed to implementing the common reporting standards. Understanding the negative implications, we immediately reached out to the convention, and the negotiation began with the OECD, the stakeholders, and the Financial Services Board, and that has brought us to where we are today. I would like to thank the current Minister of Financial Services for his commitment, as well as financial services ministers in the past, including the Honorable Alison Maynard Gibson, as well as Hope Strawn and Ryan Pinder, all made very important steps to bring us to where we are today. I understand that the Minister of Financial Services will be traveling soon to sign an agreement which will push us towards becoming a member of the convention on multilateral approach to automatic exchange on financial account information, and that is good news for the industry. And Madam President, this has been a long road. It's been a hard fight with lots of setbacks. But as a small island state, we must continue to fight to stay current, remain competitive, use our geographic location as an advantage, work hard to design new innovative packages, ensure that the industry survives, and we are able to attract new businesses. Madam President, I support both bills, and the only problem that I have is I was a bit disappointed because we agreed in the lower house that the debate would be non-contentious, and subsequently after the completion of the debate, the Prime Minister gave a press release pointing fingers at the Progressive Party and all of our former members or former ministers of financial services sector as being laid back and not proactive. We all know that these legislations are directed from advice from industry. And the only thing the government does is create legislation and policies to assist industry. And so I found that to be very unfortunate, and I completely disagree with him, but I will join with the AG and other members who have decided to take this debate to a higher level and to say that I, as well as many members of the community, are very grateful for where we are today, and I support both bills as well as the regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Darville. As many? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Renard Henfield.
Good morning, Madam President. I rise once again with great pride as a consultative senator to support the amendments with brief remarks or contributions. And I wish to commend the opposition members in the other place and the leader of opposition business in the Senate today for the position and the political maturity as we proceed to address these two amendments, or amended bills. And I wish to draw the nation's attention, Madam President, to what they would have witnessed in Parliament this week alone. One day they saw the government making a first world maneuver while the opposition opposed for any number of reasons, and while the consultative senators placed civil society's concerns on the table. And now today, we are all on one accord. Today, each side clearly demonstrates our collective commitment to protecting the integrity of the Bahamas. None of us, whether we be consultative senators, the opposition senators, or government senators, will stand by and allow our beloved country to be blacklisted or downgraded again. And this is what the Bahamian people want to see, Madam President, a bipartisan approach to fixing the Bahamas. And each member is to be commended, Madam President, for their nationalism and political maturity.
Thank you.
Madam President, prior to accepting this consultative appointment amidst loud controversy, I was rather unreasonable, defiant, rebellious, and opinionated, rather than informed. And I admit that. I admit that. I am one of many Bahamians that are vehemently opposed to bowing down to the dictates of the international community and organizations. But I have since come across Proverbs 18:2, as I shared in my last contribution. And as I said in my last contribution, Madam President, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing their opinion. And this is a highly technical piece of legislation that addresses high level of international relations. And I wish to add that for many who've occupied these halls, Madam President, the same can be said that in order to be old and wise, we once had to be young and foolish. Today, today I appreciate. Yes.
I missed that.
Yes. But today, yes. Today I appreciate that a large sector of our economy, Madam President, and country at large is dependent on the Bahamas' integrity. On the Bahamas' integrity on the international stage. And we need foreign currency to flow in and out of the Bahamas. We need investors to want to invest in the Bahamas, and we need other countries to respect the Bahamas for being above board. In order for countries around the globe to permit and/or encourage their citizens, banks, and other corporations to do business in the Bahamas, they require that we adhere to world standards and/or international best practices. The standards that we must adhere to applies to Trinidad, Turks and Caicos, Panama, St. Lucia, South Korea, and the UK.
Does it apply to Israel?
Truth be told, and in all due fairness, successive governments, Madam President, especially since 2001 or 2002 thereabout, have sought to protect the integrity of the Bahamas, our people, and our financial sector. And when we glance through the legislations and amendments over the last 20 years, Madam President, you'll see that we are constantly amending our laws to comply with international demands. We must be ever mindful of an ever-changing international environment. At the same time, we must urge the current government to go to the negotiation table with the audacity that it will negotiate from a position of strength and advance our country's agenda and our aspirations in the international community. Madam President, there is a perception that the Bahamas is a tax haven. And while those of us in this place are aware that some of our CARICOM neighbors fell victim to blacklisting just this week, many of our people may have not been monitoring the developments, the causes, or the effects. Earlier this week, the European Union blacklisted 17 countries that they say refuse to cooperate with the crackdown on tax evasion. Countries the likes of Panama, St. Lucia, Turks and Caicos, Barbados, the United Arab Emirates, and the American Samoa are among that 17. And in deciding if a country is to be blacklisted, the EU's finance ministers measure the transparency of the respective country's regime, enforcement, regulations, and tax rates, amongst other things, Madam President. And the French finance minister went so far as to express that these tax havens or tax haven countries should be blocked from any right to seek help from global financial institutions. Madam President, the Bahamas must resist the temptation to be perceived as a tax haven, and we must endeavor to show that we are a low-tax jurisdiction instead. I wish to draw attention to the new insertions, Madam President, immediately after Section 11 of the existing Act, which is the International Tax Cooperation Act, which in my view demonstrates the Bahamas' commitment to tax cooperation and our intolerance to infringement. It imposes an administrative penalty for failures to comply with a notice on a person of up to $300,000 for each contravention. Madam President, failure to file or deliver a document within the required time period subjects an individual or person to a penalty of up to $1,000 per day from the date of the requirement to file. Madam President, I believe this sends a clear message to the EU, the G20 members, the OECD, the US, and any other body that the Bahamas is not a tax haven and that we are committed to strengthening compliance and enforcement. Also, it sends a message to our people that we are committed to protecting the integrity of our financial services, their careers, and our country. Madam President, I wish to conclude, again, as I started, with commending the government and the opposition for being on one accord. When it comes to protecting the integrity of the Bahamas, we are on the same page. I believe that our differences should end when we have to protect the Bahamas' integrity, when we have to protect the people of the Bahamas, and we have to protect the Bahamian economy. And Madam President, again, as a consultative senator, I urge this government to always negotiate from a position of strength with the various international bodies, or every year we'll find ourselves jumping through hoops to make amendments. And I am very proud to support the bills and the amendments, Madam President.
As many. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred Mitchell.
In terms of these, you need to start over? Okay, yeah, well, here I am again. Nice to see you all out there. Is the mic on now? Yes, sir. Yeah, okay. Earlier I was told by our colleague, so is the time start again? I want my 30 seconds back, as Maxine Waters says, reclaiming my time. Yes. As I was saying, this was a piece of legislation that ordinarily would have been done on the nod, because as the learned Attorney General said, the matter is entirely technical, all about international treaties and all this stuff about financial services and what we're doing to protect the financial services sector. But I thought in our internal caucus, as we were talking about this, that this was an opportunity also to amplify, apropos what the senator just before had said about us being supplicants to the world, and talked about the ethics of the jurisdiction being transparent and that we must be above board, and all of this is good for the sector. But I have always, in connection with the financial services sector, raised the point about the ethics of these developed countries and their conduct towards smaller countries. And there is something off about their ethics, because what they have done in doing all of these things, and we are fighting to keep jobs and all the rest of it, is they have essentially gone back on the creed of free trade, which was something they were touting 10, 15 years ago. Remember that? And that's how there's this herd instinct around the world, where you run off in one direction to get about something, and then the international community suddenly changes its mind and says, we're going in another direction, and they don't check for us or anything. I mean, we see, for example, what happened with the relations between the United States and our neighbor, Cuba. And I kept telling people, they're our neighbor. We have a responsibility to have relations with them. And so it is important for us to have a good relationship with our closest neighbor. And when the United States decides that they're going to change, they're not going to ask us a thing. They're just going to change. And if you suffer, too bad. That's how it goes. And they're the big players in the field. And so we now face what we face with the European Union and the United States. So the ethical issue is this. Having decided that they are no longer interested in free trade, that they're going to put up all these barriers to trade, because one of the aspects of free trade was tax competition. You have no tax, that means you could compete with a society that has 10% or 30% tax. Now, all of that is out the window, and they say everybody must have tax, because the next thing that is coming down the road, and you saw one of the advocates for the sector saying this just last week, that the only thing that's really going to cure this problem is the imposition of some kind of corporate income tax in order to get these people to back off where they're headed. So sometime down the road, somebody's going to come calling with that. So the goalposts keep shifting. But what concerns me really is the sort of practical effect that all of this has had on us in this sense. Bank accounts are being shut down without explanation in the country. There was a whole raft of reports in the Tribune this week, I believe, of people who live here who say, look, I've been with the Royal Bank of Canada all of these years, and suddenly I can't access my account because they sent some document to me they claim 2 months ago, and it was supposed to be KYC information I didn't get it, and because the deadline passed, suddenly I can't access my bank accounts, and worse, I can't get my money out of the bank. And that has happened all because of these strictures that were imposed piece by piece, piecemeal, since the year 2000. And it's just gotten worse. It is a total and virtual nightmare if you are any one of us to open a bank account anywhere, because they've created this nonsense about politically exposed persons. And once you're one of those, you, your wife, your family can't get anything done in a bank. It's ridiculous. The first I heard of it was the foreign minister of Panama was talking to me, complaining that his bank account in Nassau had been shut down preemptorily. And I said, what? Yeah, because I'm the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Panama and a politically exposed person. And it took him months to get it reversed. The foreign minister of the UK told me that it's not only here, but the daughter of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, 12 years old, couldn't open a bank account in the UK because she was her father's daughter. I mean, this is utter rubbish. Yes, sir, in the UK, in the UK. I'm using various jurisdictions. There's not just a problem. But I say we've hemmed ourselves into this nonsense that we can't seem to escape. And then the sort of double whammy is you now say that the banks must be transparent. So we bend over backwards to pass all these laws and to change all the things to make sure we're transparent and all the rest of it, to meet the strictures that you set. Then when you set them, your banking sector then says, we're not going to cash your checks overseas because you don't, not because you don't meet the standard, you passed all the laws and all the rest of it, but they say the risk is too high. And then when you go to the governments to complain about it, they say, well, that's not a government issue. That's a business decision being made by the banks. So pretty soon, if we don't address this issue, and this is what why I look to the point of the speaker before me, is that at some point you want to say, when do you actually stand up and say, enough of this rubbish? You know, enough of it. The problem is we don't have the leverage and we haven't found an opening, so we keep, going back and going back. So I hope, that in doing this, that this helps to protect the sector. Let me say that, Madam President, that the Progressive Liberal Party did everything which was required to make sure that we are here today. In the sense, not in the sense of the timing, but in the sense of everything which the sector said was required, everything that our international, and I love this expression, partners say that they want, we've done. But it's a very heavy-handed one-way partnership, I can tell you, because this is like a gun to your head. You can't say no. Otherwise, you're in a jam. But we did everything. If the sector came to us and said, "Do X," we did it. Simple as that. No issue. Now, the Attorney General mentioned speed as one of his criteria. Let's look at speed. First, the sector came to us and said, "We want the bilateral approach." That's what they said. We said, fine, no problem with us. We go with that. Then, sometime during this year, I think you said there was a meeting in April. I remembered it February, March, there were meetings. A man comes a-calling from the OECD who is in charge of this issue and says, look, you're not going to be able to get all these things signed. We don't see that as practical. And so you're not going to make it on this list, the next list we have, which came out 2 days ago. So we knew, the PLP knew that we wouldn't be on that list. But if you don't switch to the multilateral or get these others signed, you will be on the next list. So backpedal, backstroke, 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 we now change to multilateral. And that decision was a commitment made by the government with the sector before we lost office. And we lost office in May. The Attorney General says the meeting took place in April. So April comes. I see from the timeline here that in June, you made the formal commitment. Okay, so the formal commitment is made. Then, so we could have passed the legislation in June. The Parliament met, but it went on vacation for 13 weeks and came back and did nothing. So, all right, vacation done. We're now in November, and we're at the point where it needs to be signed. So what I'm saying is, the only point I'm making is why you want to join issue. Yesterday, you called the House of Assembly together, right? Everybody's calm and collected. The Minister for Financial Services is either the mover or the seconder. The Minister of Finance is either the mover or seconder. They mention nothing about the PLP having a problem with this and so on and so forth, right? So while we are all glad-handing one another in the House and saying nice things to one another, right, out comes this press release, which is an absolute stab in the back. Says, you fellas are the fault. That's the reason. And then we're being asked this morning to come here and be nice and kind to the Attorney General, which we are happy to do, because it's the country that counts. All you have to do is say patriotism. All you have to say is Commonwealth of the Bahamas, we stand with you. There's no difference. So why you want to get mixed up in this? Why? Why? You. I'm talking about the collective you. Why do you want to do that? You know, as Bahamians say, yuck up my vexation this morning, man. And you know my cousin Glennis Anna Martin, she doesn't hold her mouth back, right? So the first I heard of it was she posted something on her page this morning saying, what sort of thing is this? You know, the same points I made here today. You come and ask us, and we agree. And then you tell us it's our fault. And I'm saying the minister, the director, sorry, the minister, the previous minister of Attorney General, Alison Gibson, Hope Strawn, went and saw the gentleman. Pascal, I believe is his name. Right. He actually came here to the Bahamas, so there was no issue. He told us all the other countries had signed, so we were a bit isolated and we needed to change fast, so we did that. And as I said, the election came in between, right? And, you know, I'm sorry, but you try to be charitable, right? But here's a man who's attacking us now, right? Attacking us, the Honorable Prime Minister. But, yes, he did. Yes, he did. Merciless. Say it's our fault. It's our fault. And so we are bound to defend it, you know? And the point is this. We could have made much more over something that was gazetted, actually gazetted. A whole half of a portfolio was transferred from one minister to the next, and he couldn't remember that it was done. He couldn't remember, the Prime Minister, who's responsible for allocation of portfolios.
Madam President.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel. I see.
I see the member opposite is on his man point, but and we certainly wanted to keep the spirit of the debate in here at the appropriate level for the Senate. But condescending to where he's gone, I have to take a stand and say that the record on this is clear. The intention that of the Prime Minister was to restore the best commission and the best commission only to its proper place where it had originally been for years, which was under the portfolio of the Office of the Prime Minister. And that is because of the very close tie-in between the best commission and Bahamas Investment Authority, particularly with any investments, and it was designed to be this way, that could have an environmental impact. An error was made in the Cabinet Office in complying with those instructions. And that document somehow made it into the public sphere before he had even seen it. Had he seen it, he would immediately have known that this was an error as an official document. But it was presented to him as a document floating around on the web, which he dismissed as fake news. The fact is, though, had that been presented to him as it ought to have been, as a physical document, Prime Minister, here is what you've ordered. Just confirm that this is what you've ordered before we gazette it, which is what ought to have happened. He would then have said, no. All I want is best commission, or to be transferred. So take all of that other stuff out and leave that with Minister Ferreira. That is what happened. So he was merely responding off the cuff to what appeared to have been something that he knew he never gave no order for that to happen. So let's not make a mountain out of a mistake, eh? Thank you.
That's
Hold
a
on.
new- that's-
Senate-
sorry.
By the officials, not by the Prime Minister.
Okay, we've heard Senator Bethel's explanation. I've listened to your comment as well, Senator. But let's get back to the International Tax Corporation, and let's stick with that, please.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be at it this afternoon with this back and forth.
Yeah, no, I understand, but, you know, as I said, when we agreed to this consent, I said this was a matter which should be fully
You
aired
may,
and
you may, you
amplified. The point is this, that I'm glad for the fulsome explanation and all the rest of it, right? But he knows what error on the face of the record is, right? And the record is what stands. So you can explain and say all that other thing, the record is what stands. What I'm saying, though, it is the
Senators.
record. It's the record. It's
Yeah,
the
but-
record. It's the record. Now,
Carry on.
the
Senator Bethel, come on.
the other point is the issue of what our values are, and I'm getting back to this ethical point about this, right? There are reasons why we have the kind of country we have. I think that the creation of this sector probably dates back to the Second World War, when the rich Brits were fleeing the Second World War and came here and used this jurisdiction to keep their wealth, right? So that's where it started, and it has moved on from there. Now, there are two things which still abide, and one says that, you know, this country's always used the legal loopholes in the greater societies in order to succeed in its economy. That's always been, whether it's the egregious case of rum running and drugs and all the rest of it, that's how money has often come into the Bahamas. But there are two legitimate things I think that we ought to continue to think about. One is that people come here because it is a place which has less regulation than where they live. That's the whole idea of coming here, because it's more comfortable with less regulation. Often, some people have said, when they heard me say, I don't want to move to the United States, because, gosh, man, the number of rules you got to I mean, it just drives you completely nuts. You know, you can't do this, you can't do the next thing, so on and so forth. So people like living in a society which is relatively regulation-free. Number two, there are also good reasons for privacy. Good reasons for privacy. And the example I often use is during the time when the Italians were having a huge problem with the Red Brigade, which was a terrorist group, I believe, in the 70s. And I remember reading a commentary during that time, and they said that rich people in Italy would actually dress down because they didn't want to be identified as rich because it was a security problem. If you were identified as, in fact, it still exists in Mexico City today. People who are wealthy have to have bodyguards everywhere they go. And some people even, at some point it was getting that bad in Trinidad, right, and Tobago. So there are reasons for your own personal security why you don't want people to know that you have plenty of money. You want your wealth to be private. So that's one, your own security. Two, the other reason is if you have wealth, you have seen, Cyprus being the most recent example, that a government can wake up one day, you have all your millions or billions or whatever it is in the bank, and they decide you ain't got nothing because they've taken it. It's all gone, vanished overnight. So every prudent person who has wealth spreads his risk around the world. Some in England, some in Nassau, some in Bermuda, some in the United States, so that he protects against the confiscation or loss of his wealth by things that are not under his control. And that's the service which jurisdictions like the Commonwealth of the Bahamas provide. And it seems to me there are still, therefore, good reasons for that. So we will meet these latest standards, no issue. But people are trying to make, these people who are designing these policies are trying to make us feel as if we're doing something unethical or immoral or crooked or something because we're involved in this. right? And meanwhile, their own societies are using it. States in the United States, some of the jurisdictions of the United Kingdom. And you will remember the example of the British Prime Minister, okay, previous to this one, who had, yes, David Cameron, who had his father made an investment in one of these financial services vehicles in the Bahamas. And it was subsequent, when it came to fall to him, he subsequently sold the interest and repatriated the interest to the UK. And I said to my colleagues, that's the perfect thing that we were telling him, because everything we know about the financial services sector is this. They say that this money steals from their taxpayers. But you know, if you're home in the United States, you might have your money somewhere else, but you still like to live in Rhode Island. You just have your money over here. And one day, the money's going to come right back home. It ain't not going to go anywhere. So what these offshore centers do is they help in capital accumulation, both for financing projects overseas and also ultimately for increasing the wealth of the people who are in their home countries. And the record is the money goes right back to them. And the David Cameron example was a perfect example of what happened. Cashed it in, took it back to England. So there was no net loss to the UK at all. And that's the thing that we keep saying. No, there's nothing. But in the meantime, what has it done? It has helped these small, marginal societies survive. That's what it's done. And every time, the ethical and moral problem we have is that you're telling us that you have greater and better morality than we do because you are enforcing your tax laws. In the meantime, people in the Caribbean are starving, can't feed their children, can't educate their children, having to take the boats to go to other countries. And you don't think that there's anything morally or unethically wrong by your forcing that result on our societies. Why is half of Jamaica now in the United States and across the world? Why are 58% of our kids not coming home after their university education? Why? Because you can't, the opportunities we try to provide, every time you try to provide some opportunity, it's being hemmed in, it's being blocked, it's being changed, and then you want to preach morality at us. I mean, there's something just fundamentally wrong with this. But you know, you're the boss, and we grew up in, you know, saying yes, boss, so we know how to say yes, boss, you know. But, you know, as I say to someone, don't think for a minute that I mean it. Don't think for a minute. Don't get fooled. Don't get fooled. Just know what the truth is. Yes, boss means simply that. Yes, boss. Whatever you say. As the lady told me when I was working at ZNS, use your power, man. Do whatever you want to do, right? But when these societies, when our kids are all back in these societies, I mean, I mentioned this just tangentially, talking to a family in Salt Pond, Long Island. They had 3 brilliant kids, 2 of them 4.0 students. And they were just talking to me, not our supporters. I just happened to be now on Long Island. They said, look, you know, thing that concerns us is we had 2 kids, 4.0. They go off to Canada to school, they get their degree, none of them come back. And we have all these businesses here in Long Island that we're developing and leaving for them. They have a 3rd kid who's a 3.9 student right now. He's obviously going off to university. And their worry is he going to come back and help build Long Island? And when you look at Long Island, tremendous vistas, just a beautiful place, and dying on the vine, and particularly the south of the island. You know, what, and they keep saying, what are we going to do? So all of us, all governments, are trying desperately to find a niche, that niche which will allow us to keep our kids here and occupy these rocks and keys. And it's in the security interests of these larger countries to do so. If the rocks and keys are bereft and vacant, you know, you're gonna have security problems. The Anglican bishop 2 away, Michael Eldon, used to always say that. You know, he says, look, the very same things that attract the tourists also attract the drug smugglers. The remoteness, the quietness, the so on and so forth. And I got to say this, right? You can't, they're going to come with more and more and more. And I said there's got to be a point where we say, look, this far, no, we're going no farther. But, I got to say, man, to get up and say, as a public official of an international banking operation, that Ragged Island makes no sense to rebuild Ragged Island. No, published in the newspaper 2-3 days ago. Yeah, from the IDB. Why would you say that? Why would you say that? Does it make sense to rebuild Key West? Same thing. Hurricane hit Key West, wrecked the place. The people started rebuilding. Ragged Island is a home to people. It's got a tradition, right? They want to rebuild. It's a free country, and if the island is left vacant and nobody's there, who you think going to move there? Exactly. Or worse than that, not just foreigners, but guys with guns and drugs and so on and so forth. So it's got to be occupied. There are sound, compelling reasons why Ragged Island has to be rebuilt. So those are our issues with this. I want to say again, Madam President, that we are increasingly alarmed at what's happening with the local domestic banking sector, to the point where our own party has now got an internal committee looking at what policies we can generate with regard to this, because the Bahamian banks may have to expand, the credit unions may have to get up, but it's a huge problem. And again, if you're truly interested in a bipartisan approach on this, this is something which we should join together to look at, because it's just becoming increasingly complicated to do. You talk about ease of business. Try opening a bank account. Just try opening a bank account. One of the things that was compelling in this latest event that was exposed in the newspaper was the person said, I've been banking with the Royal Bank of Canada for 40 years. And they're asking me to produce information about who I am. Well, what are they talking about? They've known me for 40 years. But that's the point at which we got. So the other day, lady, I hadn't been to a bank 10, 15 years. And it's like going to the dentist for me. I don't want to go in no bank, right? Don't want to see them. But so I have to go in there because they refuse to, something they said they wouldn't issue to me unless I make a personal appearance. Why in the name of heaven I got to make a personal appearance in a bank, I have no idea, but I go in, right? So, but there are all kinds of checks and balances to do that. But that's where we are. So we support this bill. But please tell the leader of your party, man, ease up. Ease up. We will work together with the government in this matter for the betterment of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and that's why we support the legislation. So thanks a lot for the intervention.
Thank you. As many.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
I could only say thank you until you say the magic words. No. Madam President, all members, I'd like to commend each and every one of you, I think, on the quality of your presentations and the patriotism we all feel. I'm still hurting. I'm still hurting. In the depth of my heart to have sat here and heard Senator Colby challenge my patriotism in the last bill. Don't believe it. It hurts my heart. It really does. Because, it makes me want to start every speech by half of the stuff in that newspaper, I didn't let you get out in your speech. They shouldn't have published it because I jumped right up on you. Really? You gave them a copy of your speech. No, I didn't jump on her. I jumped at her. Okay, and the press really needs to be careful when they publish. I think that they should check against delivery, because sometimes in the fervor of the midnight hour, as they are writing these speeches, they get a little carried away and say things that are hurtful and untrue and cause offense. And as you started, I intervened, and I don't think that they should have published that without making it clear what actually happened. Of course, if you miss and criticize the press, you get demonized for at least 2 weeks. So
I see they
demonized me today.
This morning.
They went out with a
Boy.
sledgehammer this morning. Yeah.
I mean,
And that's a tabloid. Anyway, I've been around a long time. I've borne the slings and arrows of outrageous tabloids before. I guess I'll have to bear them again. On your issue, though, that was raised with regard to not the ease of doing banking business, but the difficulties of doing banking business, this really would be something that would be fleshed out more in the next debate that we'll have on the Financial Transactions Reporting Act. But suffice it to say that the National Risk Assessment, which is the basis for training of compliance officers and the imposition in the sector of the new risk-based supervision principles will come in. I can't say that there'll be any easing of risk-based supervision for politically exposed persons, which are not a new creation. I'll come to that in a minute. And I'll give you a very good example as to why they're not a new creation of this bill. But certainly, banks will be encouraged to reduce the due diligence requirements based on their analysis of each customer's risk. An old age pensioner whose only income is their old age pension cannot be subjected to the same standards of due diligence as a politician, a businessman, a trader, etc. And so banks will be encouraged to correspondingly adapt their, so say, for example, we don't need your national insurance card, a copy of your passport. We don't need to have 3 light bills, financial reference, your pastor's reference, etc. And so the idea would be to move that. But the present initiative, I think, is directly related not only to the current one-size-fits-all know your customer due diligence standards that have been in place since 2000. They also reflect an observation in the recent mutual evaluation of the Bahamas, in respect of which we were found deficient. They found that the number of unverified accounts in the commercial banking system were unsustainably too high. Now, the difficulty with their assessment is they lumped all accounts that had any deficiency in them. So the persons who were complaining, who would have had relations with the Royal Bank for years, their accounts, because of the former strict regime, would have been deemed to be non-compliant because, for example, someone who's had a banking relationship for 40 years and would have given something, maybe the driver's license expired. Maybe the passport was expired. Once there is something that is not up to date in the due diligence package, the bank was mandated to treat it as non-compliant. And therefore, they treated all these accounts, in many cases, the persons who may just had to have supplied one updated document to comply with. But the banks were under an intense mandate because the issue now is implementation. So hopefully, the banks themselves will invest out of the interest of just maintaining a respectful relationship with their existing clients, invest a little more in an outreach prior to taking drastic actions to actually use available means to connect. Now, that emphasizes the point because the bank said they would have emailed everybody, I believe, and sent things to addresses. Addresses change, emails are changed. And so it's a two-way street. If you know that you have to keep current with your bank, as everybody should know, and you change your email, let the bank know. But hopefully that'll be received. Hopefully the new risk-based supervision systems will address the more egregious aspects of the policy. But at the end of the day, the level of unverified accounts has to be driven down. And if it can't be driven down, they have to be closed. And that, I think, is where we're at. But hopefully with the new system, we can get around that. On the question of speed, which Much offense has been taken at the Prime Minister's comment, and you know, in all of my discussions and introduction of this issue as to why we are where we are today, going back to some public statements I made, to statements I made to industry, you know, I've speaking in this capacity, I've tried merely to point out the facts. Facts are then the subject of comment or interpretation. But the facts that I touched on in this speech and are verified and documented is that in 2014 the Bahamas made the commitment. It wasn't until 2 years later, in December, that the laws were passed. It was only in December of 2016 that letters were written to 43 jurisdictions. We had to get 60 now. 43 jurisdictions were written, okay? In December of 2016. There was a 2-year lag, okay? That may have been, I see member opposite was complaining about, he said 13-week vacation. Well, in that 13 weeks, I don't think it was that long. It was not a vacation. It certainly wasn't a vacation from my office. My office was trying to catch up with a lot of what had to be done to bring the Bahamas to this point where we could comply. I met a draft, no, seriously. We were told that our proceeds of crime law was ineffective. I said, is there a draft? No. The Law Reform Commission and the draftsperson in the office didn't have it. I was told that in 2012 or thereabouts, a consultancy, may have been around 2014, a consultancy was entered into with a Queen's Counsel named Mitchell, not family you. Yeah, and he sounded rather Glaswegian when I spoke to him, from Glasgow. And you may come from the same stock, the same route. Okay. The point being, I asked for the file. In the bottom of the file was a draft proceeds of crime bill, about 2/3 completed, large blocks. This requires policy input. You may wish to consider whether to look for this or that. You know, it was patchy, and it was only a framework document. It had some of the new things that you'll see in the present act when you look at it, but there were large gaps, and it sat on the file since at least 2014. Let me be safe, 2014. Okay, we had to grab that file, and we had to go starting from section 1, because everything had to be updated and brought in line with what were the adverse findings in the 2017 Mutual Evaluation Report. We reconstructed this bill. Okay? We didn't just take something some non-Bahamian gave to us. We reworked, reconstructed it. And this had to happen not just with the Proceeds of Crime Bill. The Financial Transactions Reporting Act had to be created. These were major endeavors, and you'd see from the size and thickness of them and the level of consultation that went on from June of this year until as late as yesterday, no, the day before it was tabled in the House for debating yesterday. As late as the day before yesterday, we were getting in responses and consultation. And this applied to everything, every one of these bills. Okay, so we've been working on a host. We have 20, 30 bills now that have either been tabled or are ready to be tabled, to move. We have all sorts of items to do, and we were working. And these things had to go to Cabinet. Cabinet had to review them. So this suggestion of, oh, the government went on holiday was absolutely untrue. Absolutely untrue. Coming back to this issue of the speed with which you do things, as I say, when there are obvious lags, then someone who may wish to make a comment on it, whether we like it or not, has that right. I chose not to make that the issue because in terms of what we're seeking to do, we need everybody on board. So I'm not going to make a political issue of it as the Attorney General. But I cannot take away from the right of the Prime Minister to call, what did you say at the last meeting, member? A spade is a spade. And if I see delay and you see delay or lagging, if someone says that's foot dragging and dropping the ball, that's an interpretive comment. and they're entitled to do it, whether we like it or not. The end result is, whatever it is, we are where we are. And we all have to work to get out of where we are together. And then we move forward. Yes, I agree with you, you know. There's a great deal of hypocrisy in all of this. Okay? Oh yeah, even in the blacklisting, they touched the Marshall Islands and American Samoa, but they didn't say nothing about Delaware. They didn't say anything about Brickell Avenue. I'm a Bahamian. You know the big joke about Bahamians, the Americans always love to tell you this, you know, say that every Bahamian believes that Miami is the second city of the Bahamas. And he has an idiot, but Cleve Indians, I think, used to say this, that every Bahamian, no, I actually heard it also from one of the United States Embassy officials who, let me start with Cleve. Cleve said, every Bahamian has the inalienable right to go to Miami. And the American said that that one time a Bahamian had approached the thing, and the fellow looking at the passport, he says, you don't have no visa, and you don't have a police certificate. You can't go. He said, what do you mean I can't go to Miami, man? Miami is the Bahamas. So all of us growing up in the second city of the Bahamas called Miami would have seen how Brickell Avenue, downtown Miami, went from at most 2-story buildings, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, nothing more than that. The biggest thing for the longest time around there was the Omni Hotel. And since the 1980s, and we know what went down in the 1980s, you have a whole massive New York-like skyscrapers. Where do you think the money for that come from? You think that generated in Miami? No. All these banks that are down there, building these monstrous buildings. Latin America, banks in Miami. So there is a great deal of hypocrisy in all of this. But Delaware is untouchable. The City of London is untouchable. Frankfurt is untouchable. The Bourse in Paris is untouchable. We know that. Our job, though, is to know that we in the Bahamas, from the time we came here, because they exterminated as best they could, although that blood still runs through our veins, and you could see it in all of us with these wide cheekbones and small eyes. Okay? Yeah, we all got that. You got it too. Well, you don't have to. You don't have to own it. I own it. You own it, don't you? Yes. We have that blood, even though they tried their best to exterminate them. And brought us on boats, our ancestors. And from that day till this, we have been swimming against their tides. And we have been succeeding. We have been succeeding despite the worst that could be thrown at us. We will continue to do so. Because this is the Bahamas. This is the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And we are Bahamians, and we don't take last from no one. You want to set the rules of the game, we're going to still beat you at it. Madam President, I so move. Oh, that we now pass, read it a second time, and resolve.
I'll handle it.
Yeah, I'll do that. Right, okay.
Thank you very much, Senator. As many are in favor of the bill being read a second time, would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed. Further second readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the second reading of the, thank you. The Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2017. If I may take a second.
Madam President, I second.
As many are in favor of the bill being read a second time, would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed. Further second readings?
No further second readings, Madam. No further second readings, Madam President. Madam President, resolution. Yeah, I know. I was about that. Madam President, I rise to move the following resolution that the Senate do resolve itself into a committee of the whole with the Deputy Chairman, the Vice President in the chair. Thank you.
Madam President, I second.
As many are in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The Senate will now resolve itself into the committee of the whole with the Vice President in the chair.
Madam President. Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that the long title of the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill 2017 be agreed.
Second.
Chair, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The long title of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg to move the short title and commencement of the bill.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor.
And commencement. Short title and commencement.
Short title and commencement.
Yes.
As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The short title of the bill be agreed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I beg leave to move sections, that clauses 2 through 9 be agreed.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that clauses 3 through 9 be agreed.
2 through 9. 2 through 9.
2 through 9 be agreed.
As many?
As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it.
Clause 2 through 9 have been agreed.
Clause 2 through 9 has been agreed.
Madam President, I beg to move that the second schedule of the Act be agreed.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the second schedule of the bill be agreed.
As many?
As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The second schedule of the bill has been agreed.
Actually, that's 9, but yeah, we now go, yeah. Madam Chair, I beg to move that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
Second.
The bill has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. As many as are in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill in its entirety has been agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg to move for that the Senate do agree the long title of the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2017.
Second. Second.
The Senate do agree.
It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it. The bill in its the long title of the bill has been agreed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I beg leave to move that the short title of the bill be agreed. If I may obtain a second.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. The short title of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I rise in order to move that clauses 2 through 14 of the bill be agreed. 2 through 14.
Second.
Second. It has been moved and seconded that clauses 2 through 14 be agreed. As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Section 2. Clauses 2 through 14 has been agreed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, it now gives me it's a great privilege to move that the bill as a whole be now agreed.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, that the bill in its entirety has been agreed.
Madam President, I now move that the Senate, that the President do now take the chair.
It has been moved and
Second.
that the President now takes the chair.
As many.
As many as are in favor. Those opposed? The ayes have it. The President will now take the chair. I don't have to say what the titles of the bill are, right? Just that the bill is in there. Madam President, the Senate in its committee has agreed on the bill for on the two bills without amendments, and they have been agreed in their entirety.
Thank you.
The Vice President and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole has reported that the Committee of the Whole has gone through the two bills, having made no amendments thereto. Third reading and passing of bills.
Madam President, it gives me great pleasure to move for the third reading and passage. Oh, sorry. Madam President, it gives me it's a great privilege for me to stand and to move for the third reading and passage of the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill 2017. If I may obtain a seconder. Good, sir. Good.
As many are in favor, well, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed, a bill for an act to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act. As many are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed.
A bill for an act to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act.
Order that this bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be International Tax Cooperation Amendment Act 2017. Further third readings?
Thank you, Madam President. I beg leave to move that the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill of 2017 be read a third time and passed. If I may obtain a seconder.
I rise a second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed, a bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act to strengthen compliance and enforcement with respect to the Common Reporting Standard. As many are in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed.
A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act to strengthen compliance and enforcement with respect to the Common Reporting Standard.
Got orders?
Order that the bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Act 2017. Further third readings?
Madam President, there are no further third readings.
Consideration of House amendments, resolutions, discharge of select committees, notices for future meetings.
Renew all notices in the name of the opposition, please.
Thank you. Orders for clerks. Ordered that the clerk do prepare the two bills passed today for onward transmission to Her Excellency the Governor General for her assent. Adjournment.
Madam President, let me at this point thank the honourable member, leader of Opposition Business Opposite, for his assistance in us moving the government's agenda through this morning, now this afternoon. And I do trust as we go forward, there are going to be several national bills that we need to pass before Christmas, that we can continue to enjoy such cooperation and assistance for the benefit of the Bahamian people. On that note, that's above my pay grade, as they say. On that note, Madam President, I beg leave to move that the business of the Senate, that the Senate do be adjourned, to let's get the date right. Monday, a week from Monday. Let me find it right now. It's the 7th, 14th. Yes, that the Senate be adjourned to Monday, the 18th day of December, 2017, at 10 a.m. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I second that.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of Senate be adjourned to Monday, December 18th, 2017. As many are in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the business of the Senate is now adjourned to Monday, December 18th, 2017 at 10 a.m.